Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and this week we're talking everyone's favorite soccer topic, calendars, right? Everyone loves them. Favorite calendars, favorite days of the week, all that good stuff. No, we are talking about the MLS calendar specifically. We're recording this in mid-April of 2025. If you are listening in the future, I hope you are still there to listen in the future. This week, though, MLS Board of Governors made the decision not to move to a European calendar starting in 2026, instead choosing to essentially table the conversation until a later date. The move would have seen MLS begin its season in August of 2026 and conclude in May, likely with a break over the winter because Minnesota and Montreal exist. But why did they ultimately decide not to move forward with a calendar change? Why did they decide on their present calendar in the first place? What would be the benefits and drawbacks to changing? How prevalent would orange balls be in February games? All that and much, much more on this episode, in which I'm joined, as ever, by the man who never lets a bit of cold weather keep him from pies in Sterling Albion. It's Graham Ruthven. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. Yeah, cold weather can't stop you from anything in Scotland. Otherwise, you just wouldn't leave the house. That's just part of the deal.
What is the coldest you have been at a game? Can you remember specifically?
Just most weeks, to be honest.
Is it really?
So it's not quite Minnesota, like St. Paul, Minnesota. Or actually, when I looked at Montreal figures, woofed, like they were wild. So I've never been that cold at a game. But from the start of October until basically now, I am cold at every single game that I will go to as a Sterling Albion fan. I've got my heated underlayer. I charge it up before I go, press the button. It's great. One of the best things I've ever bought.
What?
Yeah, heated underlayer.
What does that mean? Like electric underwear?
It's like heated. Do you know what it's like? It's like a sort of like a gilet, but it's like a foil gilet sort of thing with a battery pack that you put in the pocket, and you charge up the battery pack, and then during the game, if you're cold, you press the button, heats you up.
Are you Iron Man?
Yeah,
is that what I'm hearing?
That seems so, yeah.
All right.
So. Honestly, it's great. It's fantastic. It's one of the best things that it was actually a gift for Christmas. It was a Christmas gift a couple of years ago. It's the best gift I've ever had. I use it all the time.
Okay, so you got it as a gift. You didn't buy it for yourself. Because what I was fully imagining was that there was a moment when Graham was like, I am never doing this again. I'm making changes to my life to make sure that I do not freeze and stick to my seat at a Sterling game, and so made those adjustments. But was it your wife who got it for you?
It was my mum that got it for me for Christmas.
That's lovely.
March is the most dangerous month in Scotland because you'll get a little bit of sunshine. You're like, oh, spring is here. And then it's happened to me at least twice this year where you go to a game and at halftime the sun goes down and you realise you've made a grave mistake and you are underdressed. So
yes.
The heated underlayer is with me in the car at all times, even now. Even as we enter May, it will come with me.
That's good. Wow, even in May. I thought you were referring to like fall spring, which we have here, where you have the 2 days after the winter when it's like, oh, it's so nice and I can wear shorts, and then it goes back to freezing and snowing. But we do also have that thing where it's like slightly chilly in the morning, and then if you go outside in the early afternoon, it's like shorts and t-shirt. This is great. And then within 4 hours, if you are still wearing that, you are freezing. So I'm glad that we are not alone in that one. I'm also glad that we're spending this much time in the introduction talking about cold weather and weather in general, because normally that is not a great way to begin a conversation, but for purposes of this show, I think it sort of is, because I'm really excited to talk about the calendar change, as odd as that might be, or the lack thereof, because I was on yesterday's TSS show when we were talking about them deciding not to make this change. It felt kind of boring. It felt frustrating to me. It felt like another kind of missed opportunity for Major League Soccer, and it might still be, but I think I've come around to there are legitimate reasons not to rush forward with changing the schedule from a labor dispute standpoint and from a weather standpoint. I did a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I did a good amount of like weather analysis and snowfall accumulation. Precipitation accumulation seems to be the big difference there. So Graham, I'm excited to talk about all these things, but let's start with the current situation in Major League Soccer and the current calendar. Have I covered all of the kind of general recent news?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's some quotes from Don Garber that were quite interesting after the quote, where he kind of suggested that there isn't the support for this at the moment. I then have questions, and I know you, Joe, and Geoff covered this on yesterday's main feed episode. I have questions about why it then ends up in a Board of Governors meeting.
Great question.
If the support wasn't there in the first place. But here's what he said. He said, no decision has been made, and frankly, sitting here today, I'm not sure whether or not we have all the support we need to be able to achieve that. Though there's momentum to try and get that done, there's a lot of things that need to happen. We've got to figure out the commercial impact. We've got to get closer to researching our players to get a sense of as to what their point of view is. We've got facility issues to look at, and those are some of the things we're going to talk about in this episode. In this episode, there are some challenges. There are benefits as well that a calendar change would bring. And frankly, my main takeaway and conclusion from this, maybe I'm skipping to the end first here, there's not a perfect solution. There are solutions that benefit some markets over others. There are solutions that may bring MLS in line with the rest of world soccer. Maybe there would be a benefit there. But unfortunately, someone somewhere along the line is going to be unhappy with the calendar that MLS has. There are people that are unhappy with the current calendar as it is, and if they were to shift, there would be other people who'd be unhappy with the shift. And I think that is a unique thing to MLS, where you have a league that spans basically a continent. Like in Scotland, we do not have to worry about vastly different climates. We don't have a Miami and then also a Minnesota, or we certainly don't have a Miami.
I thought Aberdeen was the Miami of Scotland.
Miami of Scotland, well, not according to Christian Ramirez's partner. So we don't have those considerations. England doesn't have those considerations. Spain doesn't have those considerations. There is obviously there's a difference between like the north of Italy and the south of Italy, but it's not as vast as it is in the US. You've got Canada as well. You've got two countries in this league, so there's never going to be a perfect solution with a calendar for MLS.
It's a bit like Russia, yeah. The Russian league and all the things you have to deal with. I think there was one in like the Russian second division where I think one team had to travel like 2,400 miles or kilometers for a game, something like that. So yeah, similar issues faced by those two. But let's not talk about Russia, because that's not a fun thing to talk about. Let's talk about Major League Soccer. Graham, let's go back to the beginning. Why do they have this calendar? Let's start with that. Why do they kind of operate the way they do outside of the European calendar?
So I was reading about the establishment of MLS in the 90s. Of course, the league starts in 1996. It's actually delayed a year, was meant to start in 1995, doesn't kick off until 1996. I find that whole period really fascinating, because obviously soccer didn't have the cultural footprint in the US that it has now. And so everything seemed to be a question of what balance to strike between American sporting traditions and more kind of like European or South American soccer traditions as well. And the calendar was one of those things, where obviously what MLS has ended up with is something that's maybe a little bit more American in nature. Europe has a different kind of calendar, although there are a lot of Scandinavian countries that also use a similar calendar to MLS. So it's not just North American leagues that use this sort of calendar. But what was funny about when I was researching this, about why MLS went with this year-long calendar, although it started a little bit later in April, partly because they didn't have 1 million teams to accommodate back then. They just had 10 teams, so they could start a little bit later. But there were two reasons, as far as I could see, why they went with this type of calendar. One was they thought it would be easier to attract fans through the summer months, which is something that still holds true in a lot of markets to this day, still a consideration with this shift that we're talking about. The other reason, and this is something I didn't know, was that MLS really struggled to find a TV deal in the early days. And in the end, the deal they end up striking was with ESPN and ABC. They didn't actually pay anything for the rights. What MLS got was a split of the advertising revenue. So there was no upfront cost. That kind of tells you how MLS was having to bend over backwards just purely to get the product on TV. And basically, ESPN and ABC had a gap in their schedule in April, and so that's when the season started, from the article that I read. And it wasn't really part of a big picture plan or anything. It was basically decided by what MLS could get from the broadcasters. So they started in April of 1996. That's when the first game was played.
That like makes sense from a sad and desperation standpoint. At the same time, though, when they're then deciding not to change it or not adjust it according to what the European leagues do, you want there to be some like, no, this is the tradition. We found this works really, really well. We decided on this for a reason. And instead it sort of feels like they reverse engineered. Here's what we could kind of agree to with the television company. So that's what we did. And like snow is a problem. That's why it needs to be this way. I kind of hoped it would be a more emphatic reason as opposed to a we needed money and this is what we could do.
Yeah, totally. They did reverse engineer. I mean, I guess they had a broad idea that they wanted to go from like kind of earlier in the year to later in the year. They didn't want to go across the winter like they do in Europe. But the fact that they start in April is kind kind of testament to the fact that they just went with whatever they could get from the broadcasters. I mean, we had just a couple of weeks ago, we had the 30th anniversary game of, who was it, San Jose versus DC United, being the opening game of MLS 30 years ago. Well, we're doing that now, like 2 months into the current season. So the season didn't always start in February. It started a little bit later in past iterations.
Yeah, because you add more teams, you got to kind of spread it out a bit more. And I think there is more willingness. You've got obviously more TV money behind it these days. And so it is an interesting sort of like example of growth. And I do think to some extent like natural and intelligent growth. There's a gap in the schedule because you don't have major sports existing in that time frame that is like must-see TV. You don't have the Super Bowl. You don't have like major playoff games. You don't have national championship games really. And in April, you've kind of like missed March Madness. So that is like a natural point to start because you're going to have baseball through the summer. But it's kind of a, they're playing double headers. You don't really have to watch every single baseball game. So you can find some gaps in the programming. You don't have to compete with major leagues that are just going to kind of blow you out of the water. And if you are a team that exists in a market where there is also a baseball team and a football team and a basketball team and maybe a hockey team, you can recognize that if a couple of those teams are playing a home game on the same night as you, chances are you're not going to pull in that big of numbers.
And again, that's another consideration that MLS has that maybe other leagues don't have. So in Scotland, every few years we have discussions about league reconstruction. MLS fans will find it quite funny or interesting that we have the European-style calendar. We go from August to May. We continually ponder and discuss whether we should go to an MLS-style calendar and whether we should play through the summer months because, well, we don't have Minnesota-style winters or Montreal-style winters. It's pretty cold in Scotland. So the idea is if you played through the summer, you'd get higher crowds. And so we actually consider, and I don't think it'll ever happen, we're not quite as far along in that discussion as MLS is, but we actually consider going the other way from where MLS is, and we don't have to consider rugby or tennis or like any of the other sports that hog the limelight or the media limelight or the spotlight because football is so dominant in Scotland and it's so dominant in England. It's so dominant throughout many of the major European countries as well. So that's another thing that makes this difficult for MLS is, okay, your playoffs right now are up against the NFL playoffs, right? Are up against the MLS Cup is up against the NFL playoffs at that time of year. You move that to the summer, you have more of the schedule to yourself, but you're moving the start of the season to a more crowded part of the schedule as well in the summer, where you have much more, you have a lot more sports to contend with. So this is difficult. Like nobody should pretend otherwise. This is a bit of a conundrum for MLS to solve.
And I think that's why, like, up front, you are correct to say there isn't really a perfect solution because Miami's perfect solution is not Minnesota's, is not San Diego's. It's all very difficult and different, and so you do have to try to find a balance as best you can. For now, it seems like MLS's balance is to keep with things as they have been. Let's talk about the potential benefits, Graham, of moving to a European-style calendar. Obviously, you are not then infringing on major international windows. You don't have MLS teams playing while the World Cup is going on, even if they take a 2-week break for the group stage. You don't have them playing through sort of FIFA windows and FIFA events, so that's a pretty big one. What are some, if you want to talk more about that, you can, or what are some other potential benefits to switching to the European calendar?
I think the transfer market is the big driver. Yeah. Joe and Geoff covered this well on this week's MLS Update episode, but the current format makes it harder for MLS teams to sign players. The primary window ends much later than the European mid-season window when clubs are less willing to let their best players leave, and then the secondary window, which is when most of the business is done in Europe in the summer, comes at an awkward time in the season for MLS teams where they are a matter of weeks away from the playoffs. And it's about selling players as well. I think from an MLS point of view, you think of attracting players to the league. Well, it's equally important for MLS to make itself a selling league at this point in its development. That allows it to bring in better players, you develop them, you move them on to big leagues in Europe. And that makes it trickier to do as well because these teams don't want to lose their players in the summer window, which, as I say, is when most of the business is done in Europe. So if you listen to general managers and sporting directors across the league, this is a big thing for them. So possibly the biggest benefit of a calendar shift would be that better players would join MLS clubs. Maybe you get a better product that way. There's just more talent in the league if you align yourself with the global transfer market.
Yep. And I do think it would work both ways. Like I'm coming at this from a watching soccer, understanding how transfer windows work, but also a video game standpoint, which is the logical place to go. Like if you're playing in FIFA career mode, maybe Football Manager as well, not having those windows aligned means that you're just kind of like, if you choose to be a player or be a manager in Major League Soccer, you're staying in Major League Soccer because no team is coming for you outside of their window or in the middle of your season. And I do think that that is kind of a problem. I don't think you get as many coaches moving into Major League Soccer or moving out of Major League Soccer because they're going to be doing so at weird points in their season or in the European season. There's no real way to kind of have that line up. So there's always either going to be we signed this guy, but he's not taking over for 3 months, or we signed this guy, or they've signed this guy, but he's going to stick around for another month and a half. Like it complicates things and makes things a little bit messier. Yeah. So moving to the European calendar would certainly streamline things on the transfer front. Definitely.
Have you ever been an MLS team in Football Manager? I've not done it for years, because the last time I did it, I lasted about a couple months in the game, and I was like, I'm out. This is too much.
Do they make it realistic to the rules and the specifications?
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yes, because they're licensed. So like some leagues are licensed in Football Manager and others aren't. And if you are licensed within the game, everything has to be spot on, because MLS obviously demands that it's realistic. So absolutely everything, like Gam and Tam and discovery rights and roster rules and weird timings of transfer windows, it's almost impossible. I haven't done it. I don't think I've done it for like 5 years. Maybe I'll give it another go.
Do you remember
report back.
What was the breaking point? What made you like smash the keyboard Ruud Gullit style and say this league makes no sense?
I think it was Gam and Tam, where like budgets dictated what players I could sign, and I wasn't really clear on what my budget was, and I was making bids for players, and then I got told, "Oh, you don't have the Gam for that player." It was a nightmare.
That sounds fun and realistic and not at all tedious. The only other one I would mention, because we've talked about the FIFA windows, the international windows, the transfer windows, Jurgen Klinsmann, when he was the U.S. coach, was a big proponent of elongating the MLS season, if not changing the calendar entirely, because he felt like it just wasn't long enough, that you didn't get players having enough reps at the time that they needed them, which is interesting because you do then, if you stick with the calendar they have, you have players kind of in mid-season form where theoretically they're at their peak as they go into a potential World Cup. But I think his feeling was if you have teams that are eliminated from the playoffs in October or November, and then they're not playing again regularly until February or March, that's a pretty sizable chunk of time to not have elite athletes playing the sport at the top level, significantly longer than maybe the few weeks they get off in the summer before a tournament and then after that tournament. So I think there is also that argument, though, even though the MLS season is long, and I think got longer because Klinsmann insisted that they stretch things out a bit more, it still doesn't really maybe cover the length of time needed to keep players theoretically at their kind of tip-top of physical conditioning.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of that is in European soccer we are reaching a breaking point with the number of fixtures, right? And how much players play. So look, Klinsmann was looking after his own interest there and trying to put together a competitive national team. From MLS's point of view, I think the balance in terms of the number of matches they play is fine. They have Leagues Cup as well in the middle of the season to flesh things out. So I wouldn't want to add too much to these players' plates when they've already got. I mean, Club World Cup as well. There could be 3 MLS teams in that tournament as well. So there's already enough.
Let's flip it around and look at the challenges of the European calendar from an MLS perspective. I don't want to jump right to weather. I want to bring up one that I had not considered when we talked about this on the show yesterday. I heard Jason Davis on Best Soccer Show talking about this, and a point that he had heard raised by a couple different people, like decision makers, that is that the player contract issue at present would be a problem because everybody's contracts are signed under the existing calendar with the existing schedule. So if you're trying to then change things and adjust them and maybe elongate them a little bit, that requires a massive amount of collective negotiation, of individual negotiation, of agents getting involved. And I think little hiccups like that become major hiccups that I think kind of inform, in my mind, where Don Garber was coming from when he said there wasn't fully that enthusiasm yet. My assumption is that there are owners who are on board and there are owners who are theoretically on board. But once you start really getting into the process, you're then looking at stuff like the player contracts and managerial contracts, but also infrastructure. Geoff talked about that yesterday. Joe did as well, that you need warm weather facilities and you need to adjust travel, and all of these things become realistic problems really quickly, and an abbreviated time frame of now to like what, August of 2026 to have things changed and set in stone so you can operate is a very shortened timeline that leads to a lot of problems potentially.
Yeah, from what I've read out of that meeting, there's nowhere near enough time for them to address all those issues. I just thought they would have met to have that vote that actually turned out not to be a vote, having an idea of how they were going to do that, and it seems like they're not there at all. So I think that's probably fair from Garber. It seems like they don't have the runway to get it done for 2026, and they've said that it won't happen until 2027 at the absolute earliest. That's if it happens at all. But the player contracts, you're absolutely right, Taylor, is a bit of a mess to untangle. You would then have like a different labour agreement to agree there with player unions. Also things like the Apple TV deal was for 10 seasons. Does that mean by the time you get to the 10th season? I know there are other clauses that Apple could end that deal early or MLS could end that deal early, but let's just say it gets to the end of that contract. Is there like a weird 6-month period then that wouldn't be attached to a TV deal, or how would that work? There's commercial deals as well. I know for a fact that Adidas really like MLS having the calendar that it has currently, because it allows them to have that big launch week with the new kits in February where there's nothing else on. You move that to August in the summer, you're competing with all the European teams. Adidas maybe isn't getting as much bang for its buck out of that deal. So you'd have that deal to renegotiate, I would presume. So there's just so much to consider to make this happen before you get to the big thing, which might be the weather. That might be the biggest issue.
One more question before we tackle the weather. We're teasing that as though it's this big, exciting thing. Really, it's very cold and it snows a lot.
That's it.
Before we talk about the amount of snow, it's fine if the answer to this is just no. But like, do you, Graham, think that there is an argument that having MLS in the schedule that it has, in the window that it has, potentially creates more interest from a soccer fan in Scotland or in England or Germany or wherever who wants to watch soccer, but there isn't anything going on really after May unless there's an international tournament, and if there's not a major international tournament, then there's not a ton to keep an eye on. Do you know anybody who just casually is watching MLS because they need to be watching the FITBA, and so MLS exists, so why not go that route?
Not since they went behind the Apple paywall, to be honest. But when MLS was on Sky, absolutely, I could name you like 3 or 4 casual football watchers who would watch a game on, like, particularly when they had games on Sunday night and there's not a huge amount on over here at that time. They would put on an MLS game. But the kit thing, I mentioned the kit thing because, look, obviously I'm a kit nerd, so I pay attention to those things. See the casual soccer fan over here, they see so much more. I think that has to be one of the biggest exposures to MLS for a casual soccer fan over here over the course of the year. Maybe the playoffs, maybe a Messi goal when he does something ridiculous. But I will get people messaging me about, oh, did you see this Vancouver shirt, or did you see this Dallas shirt? Like, because Adidas do tend to take a few more risks with the MLS shirts, and it's at a time when nothing else is released. And if you put that in August and it gets lost in the noise. And I think about how we do our MLS previews every single year. If that season is kicking off in August, what are we doing? We've got Premier League previews to do. Various other leagues are starting up. Bundesliga, La Liga, Serie A. You've got Champions League qualification. Champions League's coming online in September. We tend to do a bit of preview for that as well. MLS would just kind of get lost in the shuffle. So, look, I don't know how much MLS cares about the global footprint of MLS, certainly from Europe, where we obviously have our own things over here. But yeah, I do think that would be impacted.
And then there's the weather. And that is the other major thing to spend some time on, because like I had a moment on Monday night where I was like, is it that big of a deal? Are we making like too much of this? And looking at average temperatures, just the temperatures, there is an idea that this isn't that big of a deal, because I think I said this on that show on Tuesday that like Glasgow certainly has colder average temperatures than Minnesota or Montreal. Manchester, I believe, does as well. Again, when you're looking at average temperature, higher latitude, closer to the North Pole, so it's naturally going to be a bit colder. But to quote the comedian Ron White talking about a person trying to like chain themselves to a tree to survive a hurricane, his joke is, it isn't that the wind is blowing, it's what the wind is blowing. And this is very much the case for American winters, because American winters tend to be blowing snow. And that is a pretty sizable difference. Minneapolis, for example, averages around 50 to 55 inches, 127 to 140 centimeters, Graham, for you, of snowfall annually. Manchester, by comparison, averages 8 to 10 inches of snow accumulation. That's 20 to 25 centimeters. Because they have a maritime climate influenced by the Atlantic Ocean. That's something Geoff Reuter speculated on yesterday, and he was totally right. That you don't have the level of accumulation and then the level of disruption that accumulation causes. You don't have that sort of like, well, we're bunkering down for a few months because there's no way to get out and there's nowhere to go once you do get out. And that is Minnesota as a specific example, but it applies to a number of different cold weather markets for Major League Soccer where you would have to find ways to make that possible and make it possible for games to be played. And you could do it with American football where you have domes and jackets and heaters on the sidelines and ways of getting around it, ways of navigating it. And that's for fewer games in those cold weather markets because you're only playing 18 games a season, so you're getting 9 home games. You can find a way to make it work. With MLS, where you were playing significantly more games and theoretically in shorts and a T-shirt, harder to do that when you've got a foot of snow on the ground.
Yeah, I looked at some of the numbers from St. Paul and Montreal in particular. So St. Paul, Minnesota last year, the coldest recorded temperature was -8 Fahrenheit, which is very cold, too cold to play professional sports.
That's your expert opinion? -8 is very cold? Cool.
That's my scientific opinion. It's not my opinion. I consulted someone from Glasgow University. That was maybe my biggest mistake. I should have gone to Edinburgh University. That's what they said. There were 9 days that were minus numbers in Fahrenheit in St. Paul in January and February 2024 alone. And then Montreal was even scarier. So the lowest recorded temperature in Montreal in 2024 was -17 Fahrenheit. And there were 18 days that were below -10 in January and February 2024 alone. And it's a similar story in places like, well, where are we talking about? We're talking about St. Paul, Montreal, Chicago, Toronto, Colorado, Utah, Salt Lake, New England, like Boston as well would have something like that as well. So you're talking about a good number of markets. If I'm playing devil's advocate, and look, it's a consideration, right? Where I think, I'll rephrase. What I think the bigger impact is the knock-on in the summer months for these teams, right? So I think the cold weather stuff, the league would take a break from December to February, which is the current off-season, right? So they don't play that now. From what I've read, there would be a long winter break, so they wouldn't play December, January until late February, which is what they do just now. I don't know whether there'd be allowances for teams to do longer stints on the road like Montreal do, but you'd have to assume there would be because the league already allows for that. Where this is a big problem for these markets is that they miss out on the summer months when they get bigger crowds, and it's better for fans to attend when the weather is better. So in places like Minnesota, they go on the road at the start of the season because then they can backload the games into the summer when it's the better weather and fans will come out and they get good attendances. You shift the calendar, all of a sudden you're not playing through the summer. So where are those games going? Is I think actually a bigger concern in terms of how that league would work, how that schedule would work.
And you wouldn't get people coming to knock on your door in the middle of recording, is my ham-fisted way of mentioning why my dogs might be audible in the background.
Was it the soccer Don? He said, have you fixed it yet?
Yes,
have you sorted it?
Yes,
you got the solution? People are asking.
If he showed up at my door... See, here's the thing. If you showed up at my door, I would say, yeah, switch the calendar. Why not? A better transfer window, you align with Europe. You're a serious soccer nation at that point. I say that last point tongue-in-cheek. But I think he would then rightly and correctly point out all of the obstacles that we are discussing here and how you'd have to then have cold weather infrastructure and heated pitches and ways of navigating potential like delays in travel or not being able to play games due to cancellations. And there's just so many headaches. I think it's still worth considering. I still think it's worth kind of brainstorming out and planning out and maybe taking a more realistic long-term approach if they decide it's something they want to do. But there are just so many headaches once you start kind of down that road. There are the obvious ones, and then there are the unexpected ones. So I'd still be down for them to try to figure it out. But I understand why they can't do it maybe quite as quickly as I had initially hoped they could.
And to that point, Taylor, of this being an absolute headache, there is a flip side to the climate argument of it's not great to play in a lot of markets in the cold.
Yeah.
A schedule shift would mean not playing through the summer in places like Miami and Houston and Dallas, and places where it's becoming more and more dangerous to play outdoor sports at that time of year. I know Leander Schaar-Lakens did a piece for the Guardian recently on the dangers teams will face playing through the summer at the World Cup, the US World Cup, the Canada, US, Mexico World Cup next year. There's a study that's cited in Leander's piece about how the threat to players will be greater at the 2026 World Cup than it was in the Qatar World Cup, and that 9 of the venues will experience heat that will put players at serious risk. MLS plays through that every year, so having a break for the summer might be detrimental for some markets, but it'd be beneficial for other markets. And this brings me back to the point of like MLS has to figure out what is good for Minnesota and Miami and Houston and New England and Montreal and Dallas, and there's just not a solution here that's going to work for everyone.
I don't know how many of those warm weather teams, if any, are playing on turf. I hope it's none. But man, have you ever played on turf when it's hot, Graham?
I don't think I have, actually.
Like, you can feel it like coming through your feet. Like, you can feel how hot it is. It's like, I remember running track in high school, and there were people who's like, they would say their shoes were melting. That was an exaggeration, but you could definitely feel it coming off of the black track, because that's obviously generating some heat. But I've had that as well on turf. You can just feel there's nothing sort of cooling. There's no groundwater. There's nothing that is helping alleviate that just initial top layer of heat. And it's rough, and it does definitely have an impact on your ability to play and withstand that heat for the duration of a 90-minute game. So it's a fair point that, yeah, you then don't have those kind of summer games that are maybe knocking you out. So I guess the answer is what? Play half the season, play the winter in the warm weather ones, and then switch and play the summer games in the cold weather ones. That's totally
we're doing the COVID bubble tournament again. Yeah. We have the first half of the season in Orlando, and then we'll have the second half of the season in I don't know, Seattle or somewhere where it rains.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so if we're moving to that, like, what would we like to see happen? I think, again, your initial point that there is probably no perfect solution to this is correct. And what I think it might require, I don't know how realistic this is thinking about like what Japan has done, where we talked about it. Sometimes it's this many teams are playing. Now they're doing this. Now there's playoffs. Now there's no playoffs. Now there's a play-in game. Like it seems like Japan were comfortable and have been comfortable experimenting with their league and seeing what works and oftentimes what does not work and what supporters do not like. And if supporters really don't like something after one season, they get rid of it and they try something else. And it could be interesting to have a go of like, we're going to do a test tournament in the winter in Minnesota or whatever and see how realistic it is. And I think it requires a bit of flexibility and almost like, I can't find a way to put it other than like a lack of self-seriousness that I think so many professional leagues in the United States, but elsewhere, tend to have, that we are this institution and this is how it's done and it's done this way and it must be this way. And I think there's a reason for that, but at the same time, I think it limits growth, it limits experimentation, and it limits creativity in problem solving. And so I think some level of like, we're going to try some stuff and see what happens would not be my least favorite thing.
What I'm hearing is we have a tournament in Minnesota, and you see how many players die of hypothermia there, and then we have a tournament in Dallas, and then whichever has the least number of casualties has become quite morbid quite quickly, this suggestion. I
didn't realize we were going with like prison planet solution from Graham Ruffin of like the Ivan Drago, if he dies approach to modeling, but sure, why not?
Yeah, no, MLS don't do that at all. I think I would like to see the switch happen because I do think it is quite important to MLS's ambition of becoming one of the best leagues in the world. I don't know how that happens if the league continues to be at odds with the transfer windows, and particularly as a fan, I find the international windows the most farcical thing. I mean, the last March window we had there were 100 players missing from the league, and you've got teams playing competitive games through that, and obviously results are warped by that. Vancouver's historic start came to an end in that window because half their team was missing. So it's just a farcical situation.
See, all right, that sorry to interrupt, but like that is a very good example of what I am talking about. Where like if that's going to be the case, if you're not going to change the calendar, own that. Don't run from that, which is the thing that I think they either try to brand that as like, look how many world-class players are playing in the league, that there's so many of them missing, which I don't think is a great selling point, because it's like, yeah, should they be? And then, or they just ignore it and they don't address it. Like, I think if you're going to stick with it, own that and be like, it's Scrubs week or whatever it is. It's your chance to see the players who don't usually get to play because so many people are missing. Like, if you I don't know, just own those sort of wrinkles a little bit more, rather than, I think, trying to hide them because you're a serious and professional league. Like, I would enjoy that. I would enjoy much more if it was like your chance to see the second string goalie and the third string center back try to play Wilfred Nancy style and hope that it works out. I think there could be enjoyment there if you are willing to maybe poke fun at yourself a little bit more. But thus far, leagues in at least the United States, but I feel like generally speaking, professional sporting leagues are not so lighthearted in their approach.
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult to do, though, when you have a competitive round of fixtures, right? Which then those points go to your tally at the end of the season. You could miss out on the playoffs thanks to the result that you got. Well, MLS are trying their best to make sure nobody misses out on the playoffs, but you could hypothetically miss out in the playoffs due to a result that you got during one of those weeks. So I still find that difficult to accept. I think MLS needs to ask itself what it wants to be, right? Because in terms of the match-going experience, MLS is one of the best leagues in the world. It's made great strides in terms of attendances and new markets. MLS is ranked 8th in the world for average attendance. MLS likes to promote this fact about it having the second largest attendance of any soccer league in the world. That's because there's 30 teams and they count all the games. Average attendance is much more telling. That's impressive enough. For MLS to be 8th, I think the average last year was 23,000 fans per game. That's great. That puts MLS ahead of loads of European leagues, loads of South American leagues as well. MLS has made great strides in that sense. Calendar change probably has an impact there. Probably makes that more difficult to grow. But if you want to be one of the best leagues in the world, which Don Garber, what was his target again? 2030? I'm not sure that's going to happen. Or 2025? Was it even sooner than that? That's this year. I don't think MLS is one of the best leagues in the world. But if you want to become one of the best leagues in the world, as I just said earlier, I think that's going to be difficult when you're at odds with the global calendar. So it's almost like, it's almost pitting fans versus the product on the pitch. And maybe some fans would be willing to sit out in the cold with one of their heated underlayers like I've got if they're watching some of the best players in the world. But that's a difficult sell in this kind of transitional period. Before you get to that point where you are attracting the best players in the world, trying to convince fans to sit in the snow to watch games is really difficult for MLS to do that.
You've made a very good point. I'm not going to lie. I might retract a lot of my arguments in favor of changing the schedule simply from it's a USL perspective, not MLS, and it's USL League One perspective at that. But I enjoy going to Richmond Kickers games, and I go to them generally not for the soccer. It's great that soccer is happening. It's lovely to see goals scored and professional soccer be played in the city where I reside. But it is definitely because it is a summer evening in Richmond. It is nice outside. I'm wearing shorts. I'm wearing a T-shirt. My kids are running around. There are beer trucks and food trucks, and it's all very comfortable and easy. It's an easy, fun atmosphere. If you flip that, and now you're asking me to do the same thing, but in January when it's snowing or freezing rain or whatever it might be. It's going to be a tougher sell. I don't think you're going to get as many people just out there. Like, it's a social scene right now, which you could argue, is that a good thing for a soccer team? But I think, from a, everybody cheering standpoint, but you get, butts in seats, you get people spending money, and you lose a huge percentage of those people for sure if you are now playing through the winter. So, it's a good point, Graham. It is a very good point that it would have a pretty sizable impact, and maybe it's not an impact that I'm fully comfortable having happen.
Yeah, I've spoken about this on the main show before. The vibe between, and I've been to multiple MLS games at this point, the vibe between going to an MLS game and going to a Scottish football game, it's another world. Yeah. I've talked about how Scottish football fans, everyone's angry. This is why we're angry, because we're sitting through the winter watching games. You go to...
This is it. I'm going to wear heated underwear that my mom bought me. Otherwise, I'm going to freeze to death watching my team while I get a substandard pie because it's so cold outside. You're making arguments, Graham. You're making points.
I'm joking in a sense, but like you do change the vibe of what those crowds are like by making the change here. And look, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that is the path to become for MLS to become a quote unquote a serious soccer league or whatever that truly means. I'll always remember going to a Toronto game with my brother, and my brother, we spotted this kind of like couple in front of us. My brother's like, I think they're on a first date. That never happens at St Mirren versus Livingston in the Scottish Premiership. It's just a very different vibe. So that is something that would have to be considered.
Yeah, there are a lot of dates. There's definitely like a good single scene at Richmond Kickers games, or so it seems. So, yeah, I doubt Glasgow is the place you're going to kind of have those same moments in January and February. Good point, Graham. A good conversation in which I have really come around to the idea that, like, if they change the calendar, I'm sure then it will be thought out and totally smooth and not at all a problem. But if they don't, then I still get to drink beer in shorts in August, and that's fine too. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. Graham Ruthven, thank you for helping me make sense of calendars. Always a tricky thing, and not one that I've fully done when it comes to navigating the one on my phone. But the soccer one, I feel like I have a better understanding of at this point.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell. We can let the soccer Don know now. I think he's still outside the door. Open the door. We've solved it. Don.
The person knocked 3 times. If you're a door-to-door solicitor or whatever it is, like the second knock, I think you can dip out. The person is not coming at that point.
Well, it can't be long until the next vote. He's on time pressure here. The soccer Don. He's waiting.
That's fair. I'm recording like where I record is directly above our front door, looking out the front window. So when they walk down the driveway, if you saw me frantically start lowering blinds, it's because otherwise they're looking right at me as they walk up. So they know I'm here, but if I put the blinds down, then they don't, and I can hide. So that is exactly what I did. That person has gone away. I now get to go relax and think about things that aren't electric underwear, but that might still be in my head for some time. Thank you for that, Graham Ruthven. Listeners, thank you all again for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.